Who exactly were the Taobao, and how did they get to this region? Some speculations make it sound like they were perhaps the troglodytes that were hunted by the Garamantes. Others assume they're just a breakaway from the Garamantes, and some assume they're neither of the tribes mentioned by Herodotus, but instead a tribe. Perhaps they were another tribe mentioned by Herodotus that people just didn't pay attention because their race was not mentioned, given that almost everyone else in that region looked the way that they did. Maybe Herodotus didn't even understand the difference between these people and other Libyans. First, let's explain. These people are found in Libya, all the way down to the Nigerian areas. They represent the same collaborative efforts that you saw in my previous videos about Berbers that come from Mali and Mauritania, in that they also have this unification or fortification of multiple people coming together to form one giant group, even though there are divisions within the groups. Now, the three main places where you will find them is Libya, Niger, and Chad. Now remember, Chad is one of those places that I have talked about before. It's interesting because, again, you find the multiple black people that live in this one region and would separate into their own different regions in a way, but still have a core stuck in that area. Now, I know for some people continuity is annoying, but I want you guys to pay attention to this dance again. Keep in mind, these people are from Libya and they represent a North African component. But the dance, does it seem familiar to any of you guys? Yep, it's the one from Ethiopia, South Africa, Chad, and many other Bantu regions. This shaking dance, which I believe is also described in Egypt, is continuous. Before I go on, I also want to highlight that the dance itself, though, as you can see, it's completely spread throughout Africa, is not necessarily something that came from some deep sophistication. As you can see, multiples of the people who do the dances are tribal, meaning they had trade with their close neighbors, but not very, very far deep in history. In fact, a lot of these dances were lost within the super sophisticated tribes, and it only remained with the very tribal, meaning that this is a deep historical thing indeed. And some people want to ignore it the same way that they ignore other things, like they ignore cave art, they ignore cave paintings, they ignore statues. You do not ignore something. When there's something that is it's like being a detective. If you catch something, you don't throw it in the trash can and say, I want better evidence. You hold on to the evidence and then look for better evidence still. And that's why I'm not letting go of this. Now, I want us to focus on this so-called map of history, and I think for the most part it's correct, but the Garamante areas, I think it's a little bit suspect for a couple of reasons. One, the Garamantes are thought to have inhabited both the north and the southern Ethiopian regions, and so it's fine that it's touching Libya, and it's fine that if you look at it, it probably goes down to places like Niger and those other places, Chad. But what confuses it is when you see it like this in a map, you think that the Garamantes lived in a stationed area where they could not move. They had a fixed border, but this is not true. And we read from one of the Romans who told us that the people who are Garamantes are not so far off from the Ethiopians, meaning that you don't have to travel a big distance to reach the Ethiopians. But at the same time, he says they touch the sea that is, the southerly sea. So in other words, they touch the sea that also touches Rome and those places. So in that same ocean, in other words, they're in Libya and they're down by the area. So this is why it's always confusing where I should put them. Should I put them in Chad? Should I put them in Libya? But in reality, just like these people that I just mentioned from Libya, the Bao, I'll call it that for now. The people should probably be put all over, just like how today they're still put all over, from Niger to the Berber areas to Libya. These people are so old in this region that literally people just assume, like scholars just assume, like, okay, they probably represent one of the Ethiopian groups that are mentioned in the past. So the troglodytes. Now, if you know anything about these people, they don't live like troglodytes, like nothing about their culture. Although, because they're called the cave people and troglodytes were known to go underground, there might be a correlation over there. Now, maybe that's just an overstretch, trying to draw things that aren't similar, but at least there's two candidates. So of course we can talk about many things, but let's talk about the Sanhaja once again. And the reason we're talking about them is because we want to put in place the Tebu. Exactly where do they fit into this whole story? I mean, so of course, in you can see the first one, the Danhaga, Sanhaja, that's the first category of the Sanhaja. What we're concerned with is the second one, because right there you see the Tebu speakers. The Tebu are defined as Znaga according to blah 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 in the Confederation, Western Sahara, Mauritania, and Senegal. And of course, okay, let's see. The Almoravids stem from the Lamtuna Confederation. Okay, so as you can see, though they're their own confederation, they still fall within this giant triad which captures the Sanhaja. And remember, the Sanhaja is a group of many Berbers. Now, I'd like to revisit the quotes by Herodotus about the Garamantes, and I want to make sure we read it properly so we understand. Now, something that I didn't understand when I first read it was that the Garamantes, even though they're described, are described as a very large nation, but not for no reason, but because they were, even the thing that I was telling you about, where some people of the same clan, of the same group in Africa, can have sophistication, and in that same clan, some people have less sophistication. I didn't take that into heart when talking about the Garamantes, but we see it being obviously represented right here by Herodotus when he says, in the first place, okay, so he describes the Nasamonians took possession of their territory. Above these to the north, in a country abounding with wild beasts, live the Garamantes, who avoid all men and the society of any others. They do not possess any warlike weapon, nor do they know how to defend themselves. These then live above the Nasamonians. That's the first description. But we see in the same book when he redescribes or he describes a different Garamanti faction, he notices that they're called Garamantes, so he clearly writes them as Garamantes. But you'll notice that he says Ammonians and water and men live round it. The name of this region is Agila. To this place the Nasamonians go to gather the dates. From the Agila at the end of another 10 days' journey is another hill of salt and water and many fruit bearing palm trees, as also in the other places, and men inhabit it who are called Garamantes. So you see here, he's mentioning two different people, but they're both called Garamantes. But this time, he doesn't describe them as not having weapons. Listen to this. He says, a very powerful nation. They lay earth upon the salt, and they sow their ground. From these to the Lotopagi, the shortest route is a journey of 30 days. Among them, the kind that feed backward on that are bent forward. Therefore, they draw back as they feed, for they are unable to go forward because their horns would stick in the ground. They differ from other kind in no other respect than this, except that their hide is thicker and harder. These, these Garamantes, not the Garamantes, these Garamantes hunt the Ethiopian troglodytes in four-horse chariots. So the other one we're talking about, they didn't have the capabilities of war. These ones are hunting other Ethiopians. These these Garamantes hunt the Ethiopian troglodytes in four-horse chariots, for the Ethiopian troglodytes are the swiftest on foot of all men, of whom we have heard any account given. The troglodytes feed upon serpents and lizards and other reptiles. They speak a language like no other, but screech like bats. Now, I'm going to assume that those troglodytes are some other group, but I, I'm honestly sure that when he says Ethiopian troglodytes, he's probably mentioning something that's so out there that it's not even worth exploring for me right now. Now, again, go back to the Garamantes. He re-mentions them. At a distance of another 10 days' journey from the Garamantes is another hill of salt and water, and men live round it who are called Ater Mountains. They are the only people we know of who have not personal names. Okay, so you see, he has described the Garamantes, but the way he's describing them for me is that he's describing multiple different tribes that fall under the same name. Again, not a weird thing considering the group that I just showed you. The Tebu, a giant group but different versions of the group in different areas, and to the point where you even find people who have completely, they have a technology that is not in another area. But the Tebu then belong to a bigger group, the Sanhaja, and this might have been something that was being referenced here when they said the Garamantes. Maybe not necessarily the Sanhaja, but the Garamantes might be representing the Tebu as a group, and then the Sanhaja being a bigger group. Now, we could go on and on with Herodotus, but there's no need to. Let's just first read Pliny's account of the Garamantes, where he says, after passing these, we come to forests filled with vast multitudes of wild beasts and elephants, then desert wastes, and beyond them the Garamantes, distant 12 days' journey from the Agala. Above the Garamantes was formerly the nation of the Scilly, and above them again the lake of Lycomedes. The Agala themselves are situated almost midway between Ethiopia, which faces the west, and the region which lies between the two Sirates at an equal distance from both. The distance along the coast that lies between the two Sirates is 250 miles. So you can see here, you know, it's very difficult to explain, but we're talking about the Ethiopian regions, and we're talking about clearly an Ethiopian description. And we've read many times that the Ethiopians are for the most part, as we read before, Garamantes, but that's not the point here. The point is to try and draw a similarity between these bands and the nation itself that is known as the Ethiopian, what is it called again? The Tebu today. So again, now remember how sophisticated the Romans were, that they had the ability to know something is still one nation even if it's different people. So in other words, they know that Egyptians are still Egyptians even if they're situated somewhere in the Middle East. And in the same way, they would know that the Garamantes are still Garamantes even if they're a loose band of people. And so maybe this is the reason why they write the way they do, where they mention them in multiple places, occupying multiple mental spaces, to be honest.